Stay with me tonight, please, she whispered as the alien pulled her into his warmth. The light around them was not simply illumination, it was a language. It feathered across Salana's skin, a soft tide of turquoise and pearl that pressed gently against her ribs and eased the ache she had carried like a residue since the shuttle's docking bay. Behind her, the forest breathed. Phosphorescent leaves ticking like the breath of some enormous clock, a distant chime that sounded almost like laughter. For a moment, the world outside that circle of glow narrowed to the press of Nirth's arm and the warmth that was not heat, so much as a comfort translated through the body. That moment belonged to the future, was the fulcrum she would remember, so Salana let memory unravel and pull her backward through the days that had led them here. They had come to Veera for questions science could not answer quietly. The mission dossier called it a moon with an ecosystem that threatened to rewrite the taxonomy of life. Layered bioluminescence, synchronized energy signatures, and a spectral rhythm that responded to touch. Salana had read those lines until the letters blurred into a steady hum against the back of her skull. In practice, it meant sleepless months of spectral modeling, late diagnostics on the shuttle sensor bank, and the political choreography of a joint exploration. Who would sample, who would take readings, and who would be the human face of a discovery no bureaucrat wanted misinterpreted. Jack was supposed to be part of that choreography. He was captain by training and by temperament. His body built for the ergonomics of authority, his voice for steering meetings and rations and crisis simulations. They had been an equation once, a variable of affection folded into the constants of mission planning. After the break, their intimacy was relegated to efficient glances, clipped jokes, and a shared record of medals and late-night emergency simulations. Professionalism wore them like matching flight suits. That seam showed when the first energy pulse hit the forest edge. It threaded across the ship's readouts like a clear note in a room of unsure instruments, a low-frequency modulation that resisted categorization. It was not the signature of anything bone or chlorophyll bound they recognized. It pulsed like someone clearing a throat and, in its wake, left a trace of geometry, circles nested within spirals on the spectral map. Salana had been the first to push for a ground team. Her voice was steady in the briefings, but her hands trembled when she finally clambered down the ladder into the light. Veera's blue moon hung low and fat above them, casting a washed cobalt that made everything read as if painted on glass. The forest walked in colors they had no words for. Leaves folded open like the pages of ancient text, releasing puffs of glittering spore that tasted faintly of iron in the air. The ground hummed underfoot, not unpleasant, like the memory of a song. Jack's distance was a line she could measure in centimeters. How often he volunteered to set the perimeter. How frequently he checked telemetry for delegations of his attention. He watched her with the quiet calculation of someone cataloging outcomes. Sometimes his eyes slid away at the exact moment she wanted tenderness. Sometimes they dug in. They found the cave because the modulation tightened, like a finger pulling a thread. The entrance yawned out from the roots of the tree that seemed to have grown into a spiral staircase, its bark rippling in bands of opal and indigo. The sensor hummed differently inside the mouth, higher, layered with harmonics. So Salana moved in first while Jack covered their rear. Her boots made no sound on civilization's scale. Veera had a way of absorbing noise like a thirsty cloth. The cave breathed. Its walls were a slow glass that drank light and gave it back in strange geometries. Under Salana's handheld scanner, the readings came alive. Micropulses in the silica that matched nothing in her species database. and then patterns, intentional repetitions that suggested structure rather than accident. As her fingertip brushed a glyph of crystal, the wall shimmered in reply, and the hum shifted into a chord she felt in her molars. It was in that green-blue hush that they saw him, Nirth. He rose from the cave like a current. No organs, no obvious teeth, no hands like theirs. Tall and willowy, a silhouette traced in soft white luminescence. Lines of deeper blue ran along his limbs in bands, like rivers mapped under skin. His head tilted in a motion that was equal parts curiosity and ceremony. For Salana, trained eyes cataloged immediately. No aggressive posture, no rapid dilation of light, no flaring of appendages. For her chest, something more primitive uncoiled, fascination braided with the archness of awakening. Nirth did not speak. He did not need to. Around him, the cave's light shifted into a slow, deliberate choreography. The crystals adjusted facets, and a small blossom that clung to a stalagmite opened as if on cue. Its petals were translucent, threaded with a heartbeat of blue. Nirth extended a limb. The flower followed him like a small comet. There was a ritual to their introduction. He did not advance with the blunt force of conquest, but with the careful mechanics of someone offering a mechanism. The flower hovered between them, and Salana felt the scientist in her line up hypotheses. A pheromonal exchange, an electrical signal, a mimetic token. She reached, not in fear, but in the precise curiosity of someone about to touch an instrument. When her fingers closed around the stem, light ran through Salana like a band of heat and memory. It smelled of rain on old stone and of ozone, and for the space between two breaths, she understood nothing and everything at once. Nirth's patterns of blue settled into a slow rhythm against her wrist, tiny pulses that matched the dots she could see against his throat, like a private constellation. The cave's hum translated into a phrase, not words, but a sense of location, of kin, of the moon's interior logic. They exchanged, from Salana to Nirth and back, touches as if passing a baton. He moved his hand along the pad of her palm, and a faint filament of light traced her skin. She felt a memory that was not hers, an image sharp and quick. Seedlings unfurling in a thinner blue, a current that carried information from root to root. Her training labeled it transfer of encoded ecological data. Her heart labeled it differently, the simplest, most dangerous curiosity. Jack watched with a face carefully schooled into neutrality. He recorded, he adjusted instruments, he joked into his sleeve. On the feed he made a note, unprecedented. Patterns suggest communal memory. But at night, when the campfire fell into black, the record alone did not keep warmth in his chest. He had the practical voice that kept teams alive, but he also had the residue of what they had been together. It turned into a slow acid when he saw Salana laugh with Nirth. She laughed in a way that erased months of formal protocol. They learned fast. Nirth showed them how the forest sang back when they synchronized palms against bark. He set a pebble into motion, and the cave answered like a chorus. His language, if one could call such things language, was rhythm and color, an exchange of attention that resembled an instrument orchestra, each organism contributing a voice. Salana took notes in the margins of her tablet in shorthand annotations. Symbiotic resonance, memory nodes in root lattice, tactile lexicon. The flower became a symbol. Nirth presented one, more elaborate than the first, on a strand of living fiber. It folded open into geometry that, when pressed against Salana's forehead, transmitted an image. The forest in bloom, a web of light connecting individuals, and a sense of deep and patient time. Pleasure, yes, but not indulgent. It was as if Veera's ecosystem consented to be seen, to be known. From the outside, the scene might have looked like pilgrimage. Salana was the pilgrim and the scientist at once, measuring, translating, yielding. It was not romance in the way Jack feared and sometimes named it, but an intimacy of information. She was present as witness and as interrupter of the moon's privacy. She made choices in that space, to stay, to learn, to touch. None of those choices negated her professional integrity. In them, she enacted it. Jack's distance widened amount by degree. Initially, he masked it with practical critique. We should limit contact. Unknown exchange could alter microbial samples. And with the kind of restraint that had always made him good at command. When his voice sharpened, though, it was not merely science he defended. It was territory, a line of relationship he feared slipping away into something he could not name. There was a night under a sky brushed with Veera's lighter auroras when Jack chose not to sleep. They had returned to the base tents after a day of mapping and sensory sampling, but the instruments chimed in cycles that made Jack restless. The glow from the trees bled into the fabric. Even the air tasted of the planet's slow electricity. Salana sat cross-legged by a console, reprocessing data. Nirth had not come near. He watched from the tree line, the light in his torso slow and calm. Jack sat opposite Salana with his elbows on his knees. The silence between them held things both had been afraid to say in the lab. Finally, he spoke in the small human voice reserved for conversations that try not to undo everything. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. Not the scientist's query, but the personal kind. Salana looked up, saw that he used the plural as if bundling his fears into policy. "I do," she answered, "and I also know how to notice what it's doing to you." His jaw worked. He named it then, not as accusation, but as confession. "I'm afraid you'll leave. Not the mission, Salana. Me." He was never showy with his vulnerability. It arrived as a flat stone dropped into a lake. "We promised certain things." She reached for his hand and hesitated, then let the scientist and the woman reach compromise. "I promise to be honest," she said. "I'll tell you what we learn. I'll sleep in the tents tonight. I won't," she searched for the exact phrase, "abandon the team." That did not make his face soften. Instead, doubt shifted into a quieter, more dangerous steel. He nodded, not convinced. It would have been fair to say Jack had been more protective earlier in their relationship, and that protection ossified into ownership when he watched Salana open like a conduit to the moon itself. He rationalized. He told himself that if the mission's findings were misinterpreted, the consequences could be catastrophic. He convinced himself that a preemptive act, an intervention, might be necessary to secure the crew's safety. He moved through the following days with eyes on two things, the data and Salana. He carried small instruments in his pockets, data loggers, spectrum dampers, jammers that had practical uses on long-range probes. He ran experiments on the readings behind closed panels. The plan coalesced in the soft clicks of his fingertips against metal. It took shape as a plan that resembled courage. Courage, he convinced himself, was sometimes indistinguishable from betrayal once the goal made it righteous. In the meantime, Salana's rapport with Nirth deepened in ways she had not anticipated. Nirth's touch taught her to listen differently. Where human touch decoded into chemical and memory, Nirth's touch carried tonal textures. He steadied her when the blue moon's oscillations made her stomach roam. When she climbed crystalline staircases that glowed underfoot, Nirth did not carry her, but stayed beside her, matching the pace of her breath until her fear smoothed into rhythm. There was a night when the cave opened into a hollow of water, and Nirth guided Salana to the surface. The lake did not mirror stars so much as hold them within itself, a dome of captive light. Submerged flowers drifted like obedient comets. Nirth traced a shape on the water's skin, and the ripples returned with harmonics that slid across Salana's teeth. She laughed, a sound that broke like a pebble into the hush. Jack watched from the shore, his profile carved in shadow, and something in Salana's chest tightened on his account. She had not asked for the ache to exist, but it did, as real as any data point. That was the arc, fascination threaded through duty, threaded through ancient loneliness. Salana's choice to accept nurture from a being whose life had nothing in common with hers was salt and balm. It is one thing to map another mind. It is another to let it hand you belonging. When Nirth pressed his palm against hers under the glow of the blue moon, she felt a cadence settle against the inside of her skull, the planet's pulse aligning with her heartbeat. Consent here was not a single event. It was a series of small suiting motions, her hand reaching for his, her staying after hours of nonverbal exchange, her bringing him samples of human technology because curiosity demanded translation. The mission's discoveries doubled as courtship. Salana found herself recording data with one hand while cataloging the emotional geography of her own response with the other. She cataloged not to make her feelings less real, but to hold both realities in her practice as a scientist. Field notes that read like a confession and an experiment simultaneously. By then, Jack's posture had shifted. Each time Nirth's luminous fingers brushed Salana's skin, a small internal ledger turned in Jack's chest. He called it caution in front of the team, concern in private. Alone, he took apart the logic of what they were experiencing. How did one safeguard an entire crew against a network of life forms so capable of persuasion? He imagined the worst, not because he desired it, but because his training insisted on contingency. The image grew, a scenario in which the team was compromised by attachment, in which decisions were made not in inspection halls and labs, but at the whisper of a soft hand. He did not speak of sabotage aloud. He did not, in the light of the group, roll out plans that read ugly on the face of communal morale. He kept the idea surgical, a device that could dampen the field, a controlled signal. He considered sleep deprivation tests and a relay that would pull data from the place before it could spread. To his credit, he told himself he would use it only if necessary. That necessity shifted the night of the title. It had been a day of discoveries, a vertical garden of crystalline flora whose roots mapped circuits of light, a hollow that sang when wind pushed across it, and an energy signature so stable and cyclic it suggested something like governance. The crew clapped once, a reflexive human thank you for the planet's patience, and then returned to the tented base. The camp remained lit by lanterns and the stray blue of the forest. Instruments blinked like blinkers on a watchful animal. Most of the crew slept, a few kept watch. Jack pretended to sleep and failed. Salana could have gone to the tent and spent the night combing her data. Instead, she found herself walking toward the grove where, hours earlier, Nirth had shown her how the leaves interpret touch. The air tasted of mineral and sweet sap. Light pooled in 100 small sunbursts. Nirth was there waiting, a pattern of luminous lines like a labyrinth on his chest. He offered a blossom more complex than the others, petals layered in the geometry of a seed, so that when she took it, the world bore down into single senses. "You don't need to be afraid," she might have said aloud, but words were awkward. Everything unnecessary felt like clumsy metal in the presence of a creature's conversation was gesture and the slow rearrangement of light. Instead, she breathed,
and Nirth's rhythm matched her inhalation in a soft counterpoint. He drew closer not as a conqueror, but as a shelter. When he drew her within his light, it was not the press of human arms. It was the encirclement of an organism that could produce warmth in the way a lantern produces a hush. The sensation slid across her skin like warm sea glass, and the crown of her head tilted into it as if to lean further into acceptance. Beside them, the trees kept their slow clockwork, and above the blue moon poured a steady, silvery blessing. She whispered because the planet had taught her the potency of small words. She whispered because her chest held too much. "Stay with me tonight, please," she whispered as the alien pulled her into his warmth. The words were not a command or a plea for abandonment. They were a practiced vulnerability. She wanted to stay awake in a language none of her colleagues could translate. She wanted, in the blurred vocabulary of the heart, to ask for the contiguous comfort of a being who had chosen to show her the shape of the world. Nirth's light swelled like a yes. He wrapped his limbs around her in a way that made no anatomical claims, but offered proximity and protection. Salana closed her eyes and allowed herself to be small, in the way one allows near-miss tragedies to pass. If Jack watched from the shadows, there was no movement at first. Then a figure moved between the trees, an outline with hands clenched into pockets as if to hold something tight. He did not approach, he did not call. Instead, he watched the scene hydrate her bones with a sound like rain, and then felt, somewhere under his sternum, a permission slip crumple. Jealousy had narrowed into something sharper, but he did not yet let it be sharp enough to cut. Afterward, the night after Salana pressed her face to Nirth's shoulder and slept the first deep sleep she had felt in months, the forest hummed on. Nirth's light flattened into the soft afterglow of a hearth. Salana lay half suspended in his arms, a human sleeping in an alien fold. It was a picture of trust that threatened to unmake any simple narrative of what mission leadership required. It was also, in its quietness, the moment Jack had feared would come. He moved then. Not as a desperate man with a torch, but as someone with a plan shaped by cold reason. He slipped from his position at the perimeter and went to the equipment hub. His hands were steady as he pulled out a device, a compact emitter, an adaptation of a relay that could, if tuned, suppress the very frequencies Nirth used to knit his world. The instrument was not mysterious to him. He had designed something similar for field tests in other systems where electromagnetic noise threatened sensor fidelity. In his mind, he told himself he would use it only as an experiment, to see what removal of the field would do, to set a boundary on this moon that kept his team intact. It was a tidy, professional intention. It was also the first soft cork of betrayal. Jack checked the clearing. In the circle of phosphor light, Salana slept, and Nirth's arms kept her like a candle cup. The alien's luminescence, when the lobby of the canopy opened, painted Jack's face a cold color. He stepped out from the shadow with the device cupped in his hands, an instrument whose purpose read as urgent in the mind of any mission commander. He imagined the consequences: rescue, retrieval, a reset. He imagined Salana awake, surprised, grateful to find the team saved from an infection of attachment. He told himself the planet's influence might be a risk not only to them, but to the mission's objectivity. He lifted the emitter and fixed its frequency. For a beat, he felt like a surgeon about to test incision. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath. Veera's light shivered, and in the hollow where the groove of frequency nested, a thin thread of hesitation yawned in his throat. He did not press the activation switch. Instead, he slid the device into an inner pocket, hands calm, eyes unreadable. He tamped down the plan like an ember. There were other options, he consoled himself. He could wait. He could watch. He could find a scientific way to prove whether the planet's influence posed a danger, and then present a case. He folded his doubt into procedural steps. But the image of Salana in Nirth's arms would not be shelved. It unspooled incrementally, an emotional file in the stack that multiplied quietly. He kept the emitter because his reasons felt righteous, and because keeping it meant, in a small way, he kept control. The night ended with the planet in a slow, contented breath, and the crew in the fragile sleep of explorers who think the world will behave like the textbooks. Salana dreamed a corridor of light in which Nirth's past, if one could call a moon's memory past, played out in tendrils. She dreamed of seedlings and of roots that recognized her as a passing thought. She woke with the bruise of belonging on her cheeks and the taste of the forest still on her tongue. When she rose, the camp was quiet. Nirth had stepped back into the shelter of the trees, never absent, always near. Jack pretended to sleep until the sunlight press made the tent fabric too thin to hide pretense. They continued their survey work that day. Instruments purred, spectrums solved into clearer graphs, and the team applauded each other in a way that tasted faintly of relief. From time to time, Salana caught Jack looking at her with the practiced command of a man who still wanted to be trusted. He offered small civilities, an extra ration, an instructional nod. She accepted them because she believed in the fabric of the team. She also believed in the impulse that had carried her into a cave to touch a flower and allow a foreign mind to fold into her night. Beneath the canopy, the planet hummed. Veera's network moved like a city of small lights, exchanging signals, a democracy of rhythm. Nirth came to the base once rather than the clearing. He observed the machines not with fear, but with a patient interest. When he drew a line on the sand with a luminous fringe, Salana traced it back and saw that it mapped the strange economy of root and bloom. She translated in her neat shorthand and later presented her findings to the team. Jack nodded, registering the science as reconnaissance rather than an alliance. As their tenure on Veera lengthened, the seeds of decision grew in quiet corridors. Jack's device sat in his bag like a potential punctuation mark, waiting for a sentence to end. He touched it sometimes, like someone testing an old scar. Salana and Nirth kept meeting. Their exchanges were small, a touch, a shared observation, a night of sleep folded in a way that would later look, from the outside, like collaborating on fieldwork. The intimacy did not erase the mission. It made her human and thereby more accountable. She told Jack about it, partly because honesty was how she collected herself, partly because she assumed that shared dedication would make it possible to survive doubt. The final scene in their stay, the one that would be recounted in debriefs if the mission ever reached the proper ears, held both a tenderness and a threat. It was the way all stories on the edge of new worlds tend to go, a thin line between belonging and recklessness. That night, Salana slept against Nirth's chest with the legitimacy of someone who had asked and been given shelter. The blue moon traced patterns over the clearing. Somewhere beyond the trees, the emitter slept inert in Jack's pack. He hovered, not ready to act, yet unwilling to disarm his fears entirely. When the scene pulled back, Veera filled the frame. Its light, its hum, the way its life seemed to murmur secrets only to those patient enough to keep listening. Salana breathed deep and was warm. Nirth's arms encircled both safety and mystery. Jack walked away with a choice still in his hand, a device that could sever concert for conservation, redemption for control. The story did not end with a single violent act or a lightning bolt confession. It ended on the fact of a decision deferred. Salana had asked for comfort and had been given it. Jack had prepared to intervene and had not. Veera continued to glow, patient and enormous, neither judge nor ally, but an entity whose courts were made of light and time. If you want to follow what happens next, what Jack will do with the device he carries, whether Salana's trust will bloom into a bridge for both species, or whether the cost of belonging will fracture the mission, leave a comment with what you think he should choose, and subscribe to stay with this story as it unfolds. They left Veera with data that would sound like myth to those who had to approve funding, and even to those who would read the graphs. The team recorded in clinical language the structures they had observed and the symbiotic rhythms they still did not fully understand. Salana described,